Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks everybody for coming. Um, Today we have Ignazio coming in and
Correct.
joining us to give a talk, and I think it's a quite unusual sort of talk, slightly different than what we usually have at the psychology department. So a bit more about perhaps marketing, consumer behavior. And it's interesting because I think Ignazio is almost like an HKU faculty over here, because he has published with the HKU students more than the average faculty here. So I was trying to go over the publications that he has with us. So far we've got 6 of these together, and 28 undergraduate students joined with Ignazio to publish this in various journals. Some of them are in psychology, some of them are in meta science, some of them are in the economics literature on the bordering of psychology. So it's interesting how this evolved, because actually this is the second time that I'm meeting Ignazio, and the first time was 2 years ago in a conference where I just went around telling people this project that I'm going to do with the students, looking for who is interested to work with me on
Well,
this.
but to be fair, Gilad, we had
Yeah.
met earlier on Skype, earlier than the conference.
Right. Yes, but you were among the first to really go for it and risk it, and say that you wanna be involved in this. And I think it's exceptional for a lot of reasons. First of all, we were not a big project and not very well known, but also you come from marketing, where it's not taken for granted that doing open science and caring about open science and wanting to pursue this kind of direction and being on the border between psychology and marketing. So we would want to hear a little bit about what's happening in your domain. You're in a management school. So what is happening with open science and replications, and a little bit, of course, about your own research.
So I think it's interesting because, so for instance, if you look at the famous paper by Simmons and Nelson, 2011, right?
Yeah.
What's the title? Geez. It's a paper like basically started the idea of
false positive psychology. Yeah.
False positive psychology. Thank you.
Yeah.
So all those people are in business schools, right? So Simonson and Simmons were in Wharton, and Leif Nelson is in Berkeley marketing. So like they had done like their PhDs in psych, but then the money is much better on the business school side. Not in Europe, not for me, of course, but for the US, there's a big difference. You can make double the money and with less pressure. So I guess they went over there, so this type of stuff that like exploded thanks to people in business schools. But the interesting thing is that the message, since it was published in psychology, in a psychology journal, and follow-up articles by like-minded authors that had a focus on replicability, on reliability, were also published in psychology journals. This message, like the starting in business schools, was only received to a much larger extent in psychology than it has been in management and marketing journals.
Right.
Coming back to management and marketing, the situation of the journal is quite bad compared to psychology, in the sense that, I mean, I submit to both the psychology and marketing journals, and sometimes even like management journals or organizational behavior journals. And the reason that I do actually like doing research that's like marketing and OB relevant, because I like applied research that has like some sort of that you can argue, at least it has a direct impact on some practice and whatnot. So I like that a lot on that part. On the other hand, the practices that are, and the practices that reviewers, like the stuff that reviewers ask you to do, and stuff that editors ask you to do, is like makes it's compared to what we see in psychology, and like Gilad, I mean, Gilad is like much more combative than I am when talking to reviewers. But I mean, if you like, I guess you've also like tried to publish in management and whatnot. The stuff that the reviewers ask you to do there, it's just like crazy. Basically, they ask you to do like whole new papers in a revise and resubmit, and they ask you to do stuff that it's like, oops, sorry. It's about it's like basically incentivizes you to p-hack or outright fraud and whatnot. Coming to marketing specifically, I think that, well, I have done like a couple of replications of marketing phenomena, one with Gilad, one with one of our thesis students, and Burak, that was published in MetaPsych. Ours with Gilad was published in a psychology journal again, because it's impossible to publish replications in marketing journals. What has happened recently in the past couple of years is positive, in the sense that, well, I've done my very small part, but of course in the Data Colada blog, they have done a larger effort to replicate some studies that appeared in marketing journals in the last couple of years. And the record is abysmal. It's like 1 of 19 successful replications. So that's one thing. There are like, I think this has been seeping up, right, from the authors that do this type of work to the editors of these journals. There are maybe some people that have power within the community that have not received this message, but others have. So the practices in a couple of journals have become better. They, for instance, at Journal of Consumer Research, they are asking for open data and open materials, but as a default, very much like what happens in many psych journals. The issue, though, is that marketing is like a multidisciplinary field. So even within consumer behavior, we have like people that have methods that are similar to those that one we use in experimental psychology. But you also have people who do qualitative research. So for them, the whole idea of replication, open data, open analysis makes no sense at all. So it's hard to find, and these are published in the same journal. So it's hard to find common ground with these people. At the same time, it's a value added for marketing to have this multidisciplinary thing. And there's a third, I mean, there's like a much larger subgroup within the marketing community that does more quantitative work, modeling, and like this more akin, like their tradition comes maybe more from economics, and they mostly work on secondary data. And I think they're like even more backwards in this sense. It's true that a lot of the consumer behavioral stuff in marketing has not been replicated, but at least you could in principle replicate it. Whereas a lot of the stuff in modeling that's done with proprietary data sets and whatnot cannot even be replicated in principle because the data is not available. And it's impossible, it's even impossible to generate data that is similar because the data comes from a specific source and whatnot. So there are these issues of multidisciplinarity within marketing. And I think in management, it's kind of the same thing because again, in management, you have people that have come from an experimental psych tradition, people that do qualitative work, people that do archival data work, theoreticians and whatnot, and they all publish in the same journal. So it's hard to find common ground when it comes to methodology. Of course, if you go to a paper like JESP, it's an experimental social psychology journal. So all the methods are there in the title and it's relatively simple to do. In marketing, we have, on top of like being a little bit of like laggards in terms of methods, we have these issues to take care of. However, I do have hope for marketing in the sense that the new generation that's being brought up is much better than what we used to do just like 5 or 6 years ago. And the stuff that's been published recently, I think it's a little bit better than the stuff that was published some time ago. Personally, I like it.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, in general, like personally, I as I said already, I like the Yeah, I like that. One thing that sometimes I find frustrating when doing, I don't know, when reading social psychology, when reading JDM, is let's say so in some articles, the lack of reflection on the potential impact of the findings, right? Which in abstract is fine because there needs to be a place for theoretical research or empirical research that doesn't have an immediate application, right? So that's in itself, it's fine. It's just that I personally like to think of experiments as having, at least potentially, an impact on the real world that you show. And in marketing, this aspect is really stressed out a lot. So the managerial implication, the consumer implication, the external validity and whatnot is always something you have to argue in each of the paper. So sometimes it can be frustrating because the reviewers are like annoying about that. But at the same time, it also like it directs your research and your ideas in following a way that following a thinking that I personally find more. It's more like adapt for me.
Excellent, good. That's why we want to hear from you. So a bit more of practical implications and connection to the field. Thanks for all the overview about marketing and management. That's terrific because a lot of the folks at psychology are not familiar with this. So doing terrific stuff in open science, in marketing, working with our students at HKU, publishing with us. So that's terrific. So looking forward to hearing. I'm excited about this. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
Okay. So thanks a lot for the invitation, first of all, to Gilad and to the whole department of HKU. So I'm very honored to be here. So I'm going to present this paper today, Choosing More Food for Others. This is a paper we got a revisory submit recently, so I'm very open to your feedback about what can be improved and whatnot. For as we are revising, we're running maybe a couple of more studies for the revision, I want to see like what you think of it. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about my collaboration with people in HKU, right? So there's a few stars in this department that I worked with. Of course, Gilad, but also as grad students, Kate and Chinyu, which I worked with very closely. We worked together on a couple of papers that have had some success in the in publication process. The level of professionalism and technical skill and like just like knowledge of open science and psychology in general that I found with this collaboration was crazy. Of course, Gilad is an inspiration for all of this, but also like what I've seen from Kit and Chinyu, it's like completely crazy. If I think of myself when I was a master's student, it's embarrassing, like the comparison between me a few years ago, just a few years ago, and what Kit and Chinyu can do, and like their CVs are like amazing. The stuff that they do is like completely crazy. So I know that both of them are looking for a PhD. Unfortunately, we're not hiring PhDs probably next year. Otherwise, I will aggressively try to recruit them. They probably will probably end up being like really good researchers to start in whatever they want to do. And of course, all the other people that have worked in this like mega replication project led by Gilad. All the students in Gilad's classes, his thesis students, for instance, Cora, Bolei Cheng, Yejing Gao, and many others that are much too many to mention in one slide. So we have published 6 papers as to now, right? And we have a couple more in revise and resubmit. So this has been very productive and been very happy to do this. This has really beefed up my own CV with a bunch of lines. And I also learned a huge amount from this collaboration on all aspects of it, because what you learn when you do this type of replication and you try to sum up and look at the original paper or original materials and whatnot is really, really valuable compared to the standard training that one gets in the social science department, psych, marketing, etc. So this is like one of the aspects of this work that is really, really important. So learning really the job of the psychological researcher in detail, learning what is going on under the hood of important papers, what exactly are the methods, what exactly are the analysis. This is quite different from what happens when you just read the paper. You know, when you tend to focus on the overarching message and maybe the theoretical contribution, which are important, of course, but they're not as important. I mean, when you actually have to run your own research, you have to learn all these like nitty-gritty details that are just like invaluable, especially if done at an early stage of the career, but also a little bit later when as I have done when I had just started as assistant professor. So in these 3 years that I've been involved with HKU, I personally, as a researcher, have grown incredibly thanks to of course, like this is not the only motive for which this type of research is important. Another learning aspect for me is like trying to understand what the field, editors and reviewers think of replication from a theoretical and empirical side, right? So especially when we started this type of stuff, I think there was maybe like more disagreement between reviewers. Now, from what I've seen recently, like the field is more converging. Like all these papers that have been published about replications in psych and whatnot have like drilled into editors and reviewers' minds what a replication should be a little bit more. We're like far from like an ideal word, but I think it's a little bit better now. So that's also been a very valuable experience. And finally, of course, like you're contributing theoretically to several areas, right? So replication is, I think it's very important from a theoretical standpoint, right? If you replicate, whether it's successful or not. And also what happened here, I think in several cases of these replications, just even by simply replicating, you know, study 1 and study 2 of the same paper, that are supposed to show like the same effect in a couple of different scenarios, you actually see that in study 1 you find one effect, and in study 2 you find the opposite effect. So this is what happened to us when, yeah, I haven't mentioned it here, but in the recent paper we published about numbing and sensitization, we had like several times study 1 replicated perfectly in the direction that we expected. It was there in the original paper. Study 2 for 3 times replicated in the opposite direction. We have really no idea why, so hopefully someone is going to pick it up and cite us. But I thought like that was like very interesting. Same for, you know, this other stuff, this difference between subjects and within subjects design that we've seen in the when replicating the effort heuristic. This is junction effect. So this very important paper in psychology. And actually, like this also shows that if you start from a replication, on top of all this good stuff, you can also, you know, expand an original area of research much more than you would initially think, because there's like so much more to this phenomena than we actually think. So, okay, so I just wanted to like spend a couple of slides talking about this, as I think is quite important. In general, we're trying to start something like this here in Grenoble as well. Unfortunately, we don't have the infrastructure that HKU has, so it's a little bit harder. But now, maybe like I think that some stuff is moving such that we can do some replications, at least with PhD students as authors. So that would be okay. So now that I've said this stuff that was quite important to me, we can get to the project that I wanted to present today. So yeah, so this is I was in a hotel a couple of weeks ago, right? But also if you go to an academic conference or any sort of public event, many times you have these type of situations in which you can just get however much food you want. And sometimes maybe your girlfriend or your boyfriend is like staying at the table and you go and get 2 of these plates. So you're choosing both for yourself and for someone else. You're choosing a portion size for yourself and someone else. There are other situations in which this can happen. For instance, if you go to a dinner with friends, right, you make a huge bowl of pasta. I would make a huge bowl of pasta in this case, being Italian, and then I would distribute it, right? I would get all the plates and then distribute it to friends that are with me at the dinner. Now, if I choose for others compared to the self, do I choose the same quantity or not? So as the title of the presentation gave away, what we found is that people actually choose more food for others. And this has like a few different negative consequences that we might want to highlight. So the first thing is, if people actually do not want more like as much food as you're giving them, you're giving them more food than they desire, and they might be dissatisfied with the choice. So this is just like a interpersonal friction, so to speak. If people end up, if people didn't want, like if people would have chosen less food by themselves, but you choose more food for them, and they end up eating it all, then this becomes a problem of overeating. So as we all know, there's like obesity epidemic and whatnot. In general, we might want like people to not overeat. And finally, if people take all the food you give them and only eat like the part that they wanted to, then they might throw away the part in excess compared to what they desired, and this may cause a problem of food waste. So of course, food waste is an issue in itself. It has well, economic costs, but also environmental costs, because this food needs to be processed, and this has costs like for the public in general. So looking at the literature, when you look at these issues where people choose for the self versus others, the first thing when one thinks of is maybe the classic economic games literature about dictator games and ultimatum games. So here, what you actually see is the opposite. So people are generous to a certain extent, but they still choose a majority of the endowment for the self compared to others. Right? So this would actually predict the opposite. So my co-author has done a bunch of these studies about food marketing. So food marketing, portion choices, and whatnot. So what she found is that when people are choosing for the self and they see someone else that has chosen a certain portion size, they tend to match their own portion size to what has been chosen by someone else, but for someone else, right? So this hasn't literally looked at choices for others. The third thing that we have looked at is politeness sort of concerns. So it's possible that when people choose for others, they want to show that they are polite, and they show that they are polite by giving more resources to them. So this is maybe one aspect that we got. So this politeness aspect is an aspect that the reviewers said we underspecified, and we should like do a couple more studies to figure out exactly what it is, or write a bunch more paragraphs and whatnot. So maybe this is something that we are going to develop further. So I already gave away the main effect here, that people choose more for others. So this is what we found, more food for others. And then we looked at potential psychological drivers of it. So the first one is politeness, as I've said, but it's also possible that there are some above average effects that are going on here, such as hunger. So you may think others are hungrier than you, so you give more food to them. And you may also think, okay, others weigh more than you and need more food, so you give more to them, right? So these are all like rooted in the better than average effects, since both being hungry and being heavy consider negative effects. And then we looked at a couple of possible like moderators or mediators, so perceived knowledge and psychological closeness. So the perceived knowledge account of this would be, okay, you may be more accurate towards others, right? So whereas you would choose more food for a random person to be polite, you know how much your best friend wants, so you choose exactly how much they want. Psychological closeness would maybe predict the opposite thing. So here you're basically doing favoritism towards people that are closer to you. So you give them more resources. So here it says, okay, you should give more resources to your best friend, but when it comes to a random person, there's going to be no difference between the self and other. All right, so so spoiler alert, we don't find any evidence for above average effects, knowledge, and psychological closeness. We do find evidence that politeness is what's driving it. So there are situations that would be consistent with a politeness account of this effect. So basically, if you're choosing for someone else, but this other person has to pay for their food, for the portion, then the effect should be reduced because you're imposing a cost on them. And also just telling people to be rude or polite maybe reverse or amplify the effect compared to the standard version that you're going to see. An important thing that we should test too is like how much food people desire to receive from others, right? So we have started this by saying that these can be a problem for overeating and for food waste. So if people desire less food than they receive from others, then we can claim that we have these implications. However, if there's no problems, there's no difference there, then this is not really a problem. So we should test this to figure out if choices and desires match or not. And finally, we also tried this across healthy and unhealthy foods and in joint and separate decision modes to figure out how robust this effect is and whether it and to figure out also the external validity of it a little bit at least, because I mean you may just be choosing food for others, but you may also be choosing food for the self and for others, for instance, in the pasta example that I made earlier on. Okay, so today I'm going to, I'm not going to present 3 experiments, I'm going to present 6 experiments. All of the studies were pre-registered except study 1. Unfortunately, so I know that this is a food choice study, so ideally there should be a real food choice study, but actually we ran all the studies online because there was COVID throughout the whole duration of this process, of this project. Luckily, the reviewers were understanding. They did ask us to do a real food choice study, which I cannot blame them for, to be fair. I can blame them for all the other requests that they asked us to do, but not for this one. So we are running a lab study as we speak in the lab here, down here in Grenoble, which should be done this afternoon. Unfortunately, I haven't looked at the results yet, so I cannot tell you whether this is going to be good or not. So you're just gonna have to trust me. All right. So study 1 is a straightforward demonstration of these effects. So we have 2 conditions, a self condition and an other condition. So in the self condition, people are asked how many baby carrots, how many nachos, and how large a pizza slice they would choose for the self, on each on a scale from 1 to 7. And in the other condition, they are asked the same things, but for how much they would choose for this other person that they are imagining they having a meal with. So basically, these are between subject condition, and then they choose like 3 foods. We did this because we wanted to have a little bit of generality across the stimuli and also increase the statistical power if the effect was going to show up being small. But actually, the effects showed up as being quite large. So people tend to choose. So the red confidence intervals are for the other, and the blue ones are for the self. So in each for each food, people chose significantly more food for others than they would choose for self. So pizza and nachos are considered unhealthy food if you look at previous research, and baby carrots are considered healthy foods. And there doesn't seem to be really a difference here. The effects are all very large and in the same direction. So I was very happy about this study. It really showed this effect quite in an easy way. And then I said, all right, let's do a study where we look at this within subjects. So again, we have the same type of scenario. Imagine you're having a meal with another person. But now we're asking people the same questions on one item that goes from 1 to 7. And the same foods again. So will you choose more nachos for yourself or for the other person? Largest slice of pizza for yourself or the other person? And more baby carrots for yourself or the other person in random order. Yeah, so this is 300 M-Turkers. And here we found basically the same effects. The effects are quite small, a little bit smaller, around D.3, D.4, which I don't really understand why, but that's what happens. I thought that the effects here would be larger and the between subjects effect would be smaller, but the opposite happens. I have my theory why this happens, but this is like outside of the scope of this paper. In any case, we found significant results and they were all in the directions that we wanted, so we didn't ask ourselves too many questions. As you see, like all these confidence intervals are above the midpoint of the scale, which was exactly the same amount of food for the self and other. And there's really no difference between, there's no difference like across foods, even if the effect sizes are slightly different, probably because of noise. So we were happy here. We got the main effects between subjects. We got it within subjects. And then we said, all right, we have done this and we have asked people to imagine a meal with another person and this other person was not specified. So maybe they had some weird, they had some weird, we don't know like how they're imagining this other person, right? So okay, we said, okay, let's do a study where we are explicitly telling people who the other person is. And then we are also measuring a bunch of traits that this person may have that are that may change across these different types of persons. So we had 6 conditions here. So we had the self condition, where again we had like an unspecified person, and people choose carrots for the self. And then we have a typical participant condition, a colleague condition, family member condition, best friend condition, and a celebrity condition. Right. So we chose these targets as they may vary across the closeness and the psychological knowledge dimensions. So if those do anything, then we should see different effects for portion sizes. So in each case here, participants chose baby carrots. Of course, this is again imagined choice. You chose baby carrots for the self or for this other target person. It was specified on a slider from 0 to 20. And then we also asked them on a scale from 1 to 7, how close they felt to the target, how well they know that you knew the target, and how much they imagined that the target person weighted. Yeah, so basically this was the study. We were just like trying to explore what happened here. Our main hypothesis was that there would be no difference, but also we were like, okay, if there's a difference, then it may follow the psychological closeness or the knowledge and whatnot. So the results for the portion size are these ones. And basically what we find here is that all the other conditions are above the self condition. And they're all like, we all have significant p-values except for one for the colleague. But here, again, we have a Cohen's d of 0.21 for the colleague. And really like the colleague condition is not different from all the target other ones. So what I believe happened here is that we don't have data, maybe we should just like run the self versus colleague condition in a larger study to find a statistically significant p-value there. What I think is going on is that really there is no, what I think is going on is that this is about politeness, and it doesn't really matter who you have, who you're talking with. You're always going to choose more for them. And this colleague condition result is due to noise and sampling error. And I say this because when we looked at all the other variables that we measured, right, knowledge, psychological closeness, and imagined weight, we really didn't see that they tracked portion size choice at all, right? So for family, best friend, and celebrity, we see that, and so for instance, typical participants, like people rated that they didn't know the typical participant, or they did not feel close to the typical participant at all, but the portion size choice is about the same as the family member, which they felt very close and they knew a lot. So these part, and for the weight perceptions were all like basically flat across the participants, across the different targets. So we didn't really find any evidence that these measures that we collected about the target's features tracked portion sizes at all, in the sense that there were differences across these measures across targets, but there were no difference across portion size across targets. So we're like, okay, we have shown this effect across different foods, across different evaluation modes, and across different targets. Let's see if this might be a problem. Let's see if people do not desire as much food as others choose for them. So we ran this study on prolific, and we had 3 conditions. So the self condition, a typical participant condition, and then a desire condition. So in the self condition, people choose carrots for the self. In the typical participant, they choose carrots for the typical participant. In the desire condition, they are asked, how many carrots would you want the other person to choose for you? So if the mean here in the desire condition is lower than in the condition, the typical participant condition, then we can say, okay, there is a mismatch in what people do and what people actually decide. So this, of course, makes this paper a little bit more interesting in general for food waste, for implication and whatnot. Again, we have baby carrots as stimuli, so people choose carrots for themselves, for the other, or how much carrots they desire on a 0 to 20 slide. So the results are as follows. So there is a usual difference between self and other. So people choose many more baby carrots for the other person compared to the self. And people desire fewer carrots than they choose for others. All right. So there is a mismatch between what people choose and what people desire for it. So that was really cool for us. And we're going to write this study all the way to public. Interesting, there's also a small effect between how many people would choose, how many carrots people choose for the self, and how many carrots people desire that the other chooses for them. So this is a 2p corrected comparison. So maybe the p-value is a little bit smaller than it would otherwise be. And the effect is like also like smallish. But it seems that people anticipate to some extent what is going on here, but not to its full extent, let's say, which is cool, good for us because the paper looks much better. All right, so we got this one. And now we were thinking, all right, we were thinking it back again at the psychological drivers of this. And we were like, okay, it's not psychological closeness, it's not knowledge, it's not weight. Let's try politeness, all right? Let's try to manipulate the politeness goals that people have and see if they do anything to our portion size choices. So here we have a study with 4 conditions. We have a self condition, we have an other condition, we have, and then we have 2 more other conditions. Okay, we have a rude condition where people are choosing for the other person, but we're telling them, imagine that in a situation you want to be rude to the other person. So here we're manipulating the politeness goals downwards. And a polite condition in which we're telling people, you're choosing for someone else, imagine that you want to be extra, no, just when, imagine we want to be, I think that the precise wording here was you want to be very polite towards this person. And the measure again is always imagine choice of baby carrots for the self or the other on a slider from 0 to 12. So ideally here we should get a reversal of the effect in the root condition. and an amplification of the effect in the polite condition compared to the other condition. So this is what happens. So as you can see here, like the self condition, we get the same effect that we got every time between self and other. But when we tell people to be rude, we find that people choose fewer carrots for the other person than they choose for themselves. So we actually managed to reverse the effect. And I think this speaks strongly in favor for our politeness account. And finally, we also found that when you tell to people to be extra polite, they choose even more carrots for the other person. So this effect can be amplified or reduced depending on the politeness goals that people have. Okay, we're almost done. I'm going to present you one more study that is basically about situations in which that are consistent with our politeness account and in which this effect could go away. In this case, the situation that we have is like, okay, you're choosing food for someone else, but in the end, the other is going to pay for this food based on the quantity. So we have ourself and our other condition, typical participants. So these are the classic conditions that we have ran several times. And then we also have a payment condition. This is other payment, right? So you're choosing food for the other person. The other person is going to pay 2 cents for each baby carrot you choose for them. So the idea here, we did pretest whether choosing a lot of food for others, and others have to pay for them. I think I had masked the. Yeah, so we did pretest that this was considered impolite. So we had some hint here. And we were like, okay, if this is considered impolite, then we should see a smaller effect or no effect at all compared to the self-condition. The dependent variable, again, was choosing imagined choice of baby carrots on a zero slider. So this is what we find. We do replicate our effect between the self and other condition. But there's no difference between the self and the other condition when the other has to pay for the food you chose for them. All right. So this is one possible situation in which that could happen when you are ordering for other people. And it's also something that speaks in favor of our politeness account. Yeah, so of course, this difference is also statistically significant as the other two, as the other was not. All right. Okay, do you have any questions at this moment before I proceed to conclude?
Looks like the chat is empty.
Chat is empty. All right. Stunned everybody.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hi, Prasad here. I was wondering some of the results. Sorry, the results that you see is mostly driven by uncertainty, for example.
Yeah,
so,
it could. Yeah.
So I was more or less thinking about why that the effect size is larger between comparison to within, you know, because so I was thinking it is because when you are like really choosing the carrots for yourself and others, let's say in the same kind of a frame, you have a bit more of a certainty of what other person should also get.
Yeah.
Maybe some kind of.
I guess you're right. So this is one comment that we got from reviews, but also from people that I presented this to. It's like, okay, here, like, it's true, it could be politeness, but it could also be, you know, choosing less food. So here basically what we need to do to make this clearer is kind of decompose this politeness account and make it clear, like, what is the social norm aspect of it, what is the uncertainty aspect of it, and other things. Right now it's a little bit vague. I guess one thing that we thought about is this uncertainty aspect that you have an underscore, which is very important. So basically, the idea here is like, okay, I don't know how much food the other person wants. At least I don't know, like, I have some uncertainty. And so, but choosing less food than that they would be satiated with is considered impolite. Therefore, I overshoot. So that would be, I guess, the one missing piece that we haven't really tested that would make this politeness explanation solider. So we have to think about whether what kind of study we can do to show this.
Yeah, I think like culturally there is this thing about you choose the food for other person. You don't want it to be on the wrong side of it. Like
Yeah.
So the cost of being wrong on the, let's say, less food is more, I don't know, it weighs more on you than choosing larger than what this person requires. So
yeah,
it's very interesting in that sense. And also, I think that's what your study number 7 does with payment. You're making that kind of like stretching, being on the right side, more costly. For example, you're telling them that you're making the other person pay for that also, for example. Then
yeah. This is 100% possible. I mean, I think this effect is cool because it's very pliable. It's based on, like, if you tell people whatever, it changes around. Other effects are like very solid and like they don't depend on circumstances at all. But I think this effect here is like, okay, there's a basic effect that's like always there, but then you can change like the scenario in a variety of situations and moves around. We haven't really 100% understood all the possible variations, but there's a lot of things that can be done here.
I'm also wondering, let's say you have this idea of uncertainty in place. It does not take away anything from your finding. And for example, you can sort of look at it. Yeah, you can sort of look at it as like politeness brings about uncertainty. In some say it's more of proximal antecedent to what you're observing. For example, you manipulate politeness.
You're right. I think like politeness and uncertainty are connected here, but we have to figure out the exact way that we can show this. But that's 100% true. They're not in contrast with each other. There was a question by Chinyu. He said something like, can find it now.
Yeah, whether you think it generalizes to the number of foods. So whether diversity, whether you would choose more options, more diverse options for others than for yourself.
There's research on this actually. It's in a marketing journal. And I think that people are more variety seeking when choosing for others. So keeping the size of the meal or whatever constant, they tend to choose a wider array of products. When they choose for themselves, and this is also based on, I think this is moderated by knowledge of the other person, right? So if you know your best friend, you know her tastes. So you're going to choose one specific type of music or one specific type of meal. But if you don't know the other person, then you're going to kind of hedge your bets and choose across different types of products, be it food, be it music, and whatnot, whatever other thing. It needs to be something that has to do with taste, though, because if it's about just quality judgments that are around which there's a lot of agreement. For instance, I don't know, power tools or any sort of machinery, then this thing doesn't work. There's no point in choosing diverse range of products.
I have a quick clarification question. So in other payment, I understand what other payment is, but in the default one, maybe I missed this detail. Who pays for the?
No, in the default stuff is a sort of either a buffet or a convivial situation like a lunch together. You can take however much you want. You can take however much you want for the other person.
With no consequences for how much you need to pay.
With no consequences, no payment.
So I'm just curious because this study is more a story of generosity, perhaps, and the other story was about more politeness. And I'm sure the politeness and generosity are kind of related to one another, but they do seem to be a bit different, though, right?
Yeah, I guess I did get this objection about this question about generosity, and I thought, I don't know if we have a good answer. I guess we. I thought maybe I had.
Because I want to be generous towards a very close friend or a celebrity, but maybe I don't need to be that generous towards a colleague that earns as much.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's. I mean, what you would say, it's kind of like makes sense in general, but the thing is, we do find this effect over and over with a typical participant, right? So it's a person that you don't really have a lot of familiarity with either. So I'm not sure if this is really about generosity towards the close others, because we have run this typical participant version many times, and we always seem to find this effect. It is generosity, but it seems that this generosity is towards a wider array of target others, basically. The colleague, so the colleague thing, you may say, okay, I do not want to be generous towards a colleague because maybe I don't feel as close to them. But the thing is, I do feel kind of close to the colleague, definitely closer than I feel to the typical participant. And yet we find a slightly different pattern of portion size. But again, here we're kind of reading into tea leaves because these confidence intervals are close to each other. We had 800 participants for 6 conditions here. Maybe we should have done 2,000, but I don't know. I cannot prove it for sure, but my hypothesis is that if we would rerun this just self versus colleague, we would find larger effects compared to what we found. Okay. Yeah, so, okay, let me brag a little bit about all the theoretical contribution and practical implication that this paper is. So one thing that we claim that we're contributing to is in general the literature about choices for others and about generosity. So we're also injecting, we're finding like a specific situation in which people are more generous towards others, food choice. People tend to be less egoistic than in other mediums. Ideally here we want to do a follow-up paper where we have dictator games with either money or food, and we see if there's a difference between how generous people are towards money or food. I'm not a fan of economic games, dictator games in general, but it could be a publication. Of course, I mean, there's a big strain of literature in marketing, psych, these type of consumer behavior and whatnot, in trying to figure out what are the drivers of food choice and portion size choice. So we do find that like the target that you're choosing for makes a difference in how large this is. So this is something cool. And finally, we have identified one politeness norms that influences eating together. So I think this is a more of a general social psychology implication when we are looking at we're looking at like a broader implication of these. Practical implication, I guess we have like a couple of things that I have foreshadowed earlier on in the presentation. So first one is that choices for others might be unsatisfactory. So you might want to choose less than you think for other people. Health implication, especially when it comes to unhealthy food, you should not let others choose for you because they're going to choose more than you want. And if you eat more of it, then there can be, your waistline and your health may be worse as a result. And finally, food waste. So if people do not eat all that you choose for them, then we may be wasting food, which has environmental and costs. All right. So with that, I'm done. And thanks a lot for having me. Very, very happy to be presenting this paper at HKU. And if there's any more questions, I guess we still have some time.
Thank you very much for this. Very interesting. Does anybody have any questions that they want to raise?
Yeah, I think I want to ask one more question on,
Yeah, go ahead.
especially submitting these kind of papers in marketing journal. I'm assuming they would want you to go on forever to add, like you have 7 studies already, and I'm sure like reviewers would be more happy to have like 5 more. Like, how do you like really try to push back at them and say, like, this is what we do, this is it, you know?
I mean, if I would push back, the paper would be rejected. That's
Uh,
the reality of it. Unfortunately, in marketing, it's just the reviewing practices are really bad. I mean, in this case, I think that at least one study with real food choice is warranted, right? We are saying that with this is a food choice paper, so we should show that people do this in reality. So I don't blame them for it. I was a little bit annoyed. Well, I was very annoyed with the reviewers' requests. Basically, they asked us, why don't you see what people choose for others if others are dieting? Why don't you see if, what people choose for others if others are have this feature or this other feature and whatnot? So I was like, okay, let's just do, one study with N of 5,000 where we have one self condition and then a bunch of other conditions, and we change the target and we change it whatever, random, the features of the target in whatever random way the reviewers want. So then we're going to have all of the possible permutation, all of the possible target others, and we can see whatever happens. I guess we're not going to do that though. The thing is, I cannot blame. I do kind of want to run some of the studies that they requested us to do, because I am curious of what was going to happen. So one thing that they asked us to do was, okay, what happens if the food you have framed, they told us, okay, you have framed all of your studies as people can choose however quantity they want. What happens if the quantity is scarce? I was like, interesting. So this could be, could moderate the effect, because people, if there is like an abundance of resources, sure, let's be generous towards others. But if there's a scarcity, then egoistic motives may take over. I did run this study, but we did not find, with baby carrots again, but we did not find a difference between self and others. So in both when you when the total sum of baby carrots, it needs to be 20, and when they can choose whatever, people tend to choose more food for others. Another thing there could be possible is like the type of food, maybe like in scarcity situation, then you could have the opposite effects for unhealthy foods like chocolates compared to baby carrots. Yeah, so that would be something. They also asked us, okay, how much food would you choose for someone who is thin, or how much food you would choose for someone who is fat? On the one hand, these requests are kind of annoying and they put a burden on us to run more studies. On the other hand, I kind of want to know what happens when people choose food for other people that are either fat or thin, because there's a lot of stuff that can be done there with the intersection of stereotypes of thin people, stereotypes of obese people and whatnot. My co-author Peggy, she's done some work on it. The ideal word would be one word. Then when they ask us, okay, we give you, if you run one more study with real food choice, we accept this paper, but we're very far from that.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, I have a question. Let's say if we move away from reviewers and marketing journals and all this, let's say there's somebody in psychology who is interested in contributing to marketing, or at least understanding a bit more about practical implications of choice. So coming from psychology, do you have any advice of, let's say a psychology student wants to know a bit more about practical implications? What would be a good way to address this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you should read marketing journals and see what they say when they talk about practical implications. The practical implications in marketing can be of different kind. So in this specific paper, a lot of these food papers have this sort of practical implications that look at consumer welfare implication, right? So tend to cut down portions and whatnot. Actually, I haven't presented this to you, but I also have like some managerial implications. Let's see. So, voila. So some of this stuff, like this practical implication, right? It's stuff that you could also see in psychology journals. If you read the social psych, right? All the stuff by Dan Gilbert, for instance, in social psych, where people are making choices for others and these choices are unsatisfactory. Francesca Gino also published a lot of this. So you have like a self-other mismatch. You can always argue that this is a problem because then you're going to receive it and you're going to be unhappy, and therefore an intervention might improve the market or whatever. It might improve the interaction in general. May make people happier. In a lot of these food papers, there's these health implications, right? So saying, okay, in this situation, people tend to choose more food or more unhealthy food. Therefore, the situations should be avoided. And you can make implications for consumers to do like for their own personal behavior, but also implication for policymakers or companies that want to promote healthy food eating. Say, okay, design your restaurant in this way so that people choose less food or a more healthy food. Yeah, this food waste thing is also, let's say, a policy-making implication, right? It's like, okay, we want to avoid food waste. This can go to policymakers and say, okay, don't let people choose for others, I guess. But can also go to companies that want to highlight that they're not waste. Then we come to the managerial implications. So these here you need to, marketing is very focused on revenues in general. So marketing increases revenues, not necessarily profit, but revenues. In this case, however, I do have something about profit because these results are important for pricing too, right? So basically what I'm saying here is you should encourage people to choose for themselves or others, depending on what your pricing structure is. So if this is a sort of a buffet sort of restaurant, then you want people to choose less food because you charge them a fixed amount. So here you should encourage people to choose for themselves. But if it is a quantity-based fee, right, where people are, for instance, there are these salad bars where people are paying by weight and whatnot, then you should encourage people to choose for others because they're going to choose more, and you're going to sell more food and have a higher revenue and hopefully higher profit. So there's a bunch of stuff about practical implication that can go to consumer welfare and can go to policy making, but also you can do a bunch of stuff talking about, okay, in this case, like if this is a lot of these marketing papers need to be like this, basically are psychology papers, but the stimuli needs to be something that can be conceived of as a product. Food can be sold and bought. So when you think of food as a product, then you kind of need to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's selling this, and then your managerial and practical implication becomes an easier sell. Of course, for a lot of the stuff in JDM, for instance, there are managerial implications, right? Too, in the sense of, because these are influencing decision making. So you can directly say, all right, people are making this reasoning mistake. People are following this reasoning path, which leads them to make these mistakes. Therefore, we should correct it to have better decisions and whatnot. So these are some of the stuff that can be done very shortly. In general, you should read, however, the marketing papers to see. And in the general discussion, there's always section, a couple of paragraphs about the practical implication. These are like the general guidelines for consumer behavior papers. There's other stuff too that you can think of, but these are some starting points.
Terrific. Thank you so much for all the insights and for sharing. I think we're out of time, so terrific to have you, to see you, to have you give a talk over here, and we'll continue to collaborate. So if anybody wants to join us and do some stuff with us, very welcome. I'll take the recording, put this on YouTube, share this on Twitter, and if anybody wants to catch up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.